Isn't it a fascinating irony of history that quite often, not always, but often, the historical characters who have the title the Great in their names are really only great for a very select few people? It was such for Constantine, the supposedly great, whom I analyzed already in this video here, and it is certainly also like this for another pious Christian emperor who will always be remembered for his accomplishments in almost restoring the extent of the Roman Empire, namely the famous Emperor Justinian. Don't worry, Theodosius, you're next. Now, why would I dare to call Justinian not great? Well, friends of late Roman history, let us find out. Justinian was born as Petrus Sabatius in the year 482 AD, so only very shortly after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Of course, viewers of this channel know that this fall was not so much a fall as a transformation from Roman imperial rule to the rule of Germanic kings. However, all the Roman institutions were still completely intact in the Italy of that time. The Senate still convened in Rome, a praefectus urbis still repaired the monuments of the Eternal City, the Roman road network was still in use, and to a time traveler, Italy of those times would have appeared as it did some decades earlier in the time of the last Roman emperors of the West. Petrus Sabatius ascended to the throne of the Roman Empire in 527, and would come to be known as the Emperor Justinian. We don't know when exactly, but at some point the emperor conceived the grand ambition of restoring the former extent of the Roman Empire by reconquering the western provinces that were now seen as having been lost to barbarians. Of course, the emperor's propagandists, such as Marcellinus Comes, now started to paint the picture of how the Western Roman Empire fell, and fascinatingly, it is exactly during that time that the story of the fall of the Western Empire in 476 AD was conceived. I talked in great detail about the invention of the fall in this video here. But before he could start his grand plan, we would impressively already see in the year 529 that Justinian would only be great for some, but not so much for others. In that year, he defunded the 1,000-year-old institution of knowledge and learning, namely the famous Neoplatonic Academy of Athens. Although this date and the circumstances are disputed among scholars, even so, there must be some grain of truth here, because Athens lost its significance for pagans after that time, while Alexandria still lasted out somewhat longer. By imperial decree, pagans were also denied from entering state office, but Justinian at some point during his reign also ordered a persecution of surviving Hellenes, accompanied by the burning of pagan books, pictures and statues in Constantinople. How much knowledge and art of antiquity was destroyed in these persecutions cannot be reconstructed, but it certainly was quite a lot. The old temples on the Acropolis of Constantinople were by that time already only a barren husk, overgrown by vines, desolate and empty. Many Neoplatonists, who were all pagans, fled from these persecutions, and some even sought asylum at the court of the Persian kings. Such was Justinian's character, just, but only to his Christian subjects. In 532 then, only 5 years into his reign, the racing factions in the Hippodrome of Constantinople united against the emperor in rebellion, which came to be known as the Nika riots, Nika standing for victory. Cause for that might have been his really unpopular advisors and officials that were known to be quite harsh to the common people in Constantinople. The rioters forced Justinian to dismiss his ministers and wanted to replace the emperor with another one of their favor, and Justinian would have almost fled from the city, if not for the intervention of his wife Theodora. She refused to leave, and so Justinian ordered the brutal suppression of the riots. General Belisarius and Mundus were put up with the ungrateful task, and in the process a staggering 30,000 inhabitants of Constantinople were killed. In that process also, large parts of the city were burned to the ground. For instance, we know that the old Senate house in the Augustaion was destroyed, as well as the baths of Zeuxippus. Several more buildings were most likely consumed by fire. Thus, the face of the city would change a lot after that event. But the murder of 30,000 civilians was really an abhorrent deed, in which Justinian's evil side was displayed spectacularly. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Western and early Eastern Roman empires. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And we have a new Restitutor Orbis member, Bob Ward. Thank you so much, Bob, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. We also have a new Caesar member, namely Robert Lindsay. Thank you so much, Robert, for your amazing support. And of course, I thank each and every one of you who is supporting this channel in any form. Maiorian himself would hopefully be proud. Gratias tibiago, amici. So after this horrendous deed, Justinian started to set his plan into motion of reconquering the lost Western Roman provinces. Luckily, he had one of the best generals in history of humanity, Flavius Belisarius. And initially everything went well. In 534, only 2 years after the Nika riots, the Vandal kingdom was utterly defeated by Belisarius with a laughably small force of only 17,000 men. Such was the military genius of Belisarius that he could accomplish such an impossible seeming feat. The next target then was the Ostrogothic kingdom, and again it would be Belisarius who would have to accomplish this even more difficult task while the emperor was sitting in his cozy palace in Constantinople. But this time Belisarius got even less men, only about 10,000 in total, in order to overcome an entire kingdom, and at that one that was significantly stronger than the Vandal kingdom. And again, we would see how Justinian would make some really not great decisions in that war. It seems that he was always jealous or begrudging of Belisarius and always gave him far too little support and soldiers. To make things worse, in the middle of the campaign in 538, Justinian sent another general, Narses, to Italy. This dragged out the war needlessly because Narses and Belisarius were not getting along well, which resulted in a stalemate, and as a direct result, Mediolanum was completely destroyed by a Burgundian invasion force in 539, utterly razing the city to the ground and killing most of its inhabitants. After seeing his mistake, Justinian recalled Narses so that Belisarius could then finally, through an ingenious ruse, subdue the Ostrogothic kingdom in 540. The Ostrogoths, in their utter desperation, offered to make Belisarius a new Western Roman emperor. He feigned acceptance of the title and entered Ravenna, but later he revealed that it had just been a trick to gain entrance to the capital city of the Ostrogoths. But Justinian, upon hearing of this, became of course even more jealous and suspicious, and recalled Belisarius from Italy, letting him fight on the eastern frontier against the Persians. This was, in my opinion, one of Justinian's worst decisions. As a direct consequence, with Belisarius gone from Italy, the new Ostrogothic king Totila would regain control of much of Italy in the course of the next years. This would not have happened had he let Belisarius strengthen the Eastern Roman rule on the newly conquered Italian peninsula. Thus the war went on for over 10 more years, and Belisarius was even sent again to Italy, but this time he got even less men, by the jealous emperor, who apparently always treated him disfavorably. Yet, astonishingly, Belisarius always remained loyal to the emperor. Only in the mid-550s could Narses then finish what Belisarius had started, and of course Justinian immediately gave Narses a lot more soldiers than Belisarius had ever received, lending credence to the theory that he deliberately disfavored Belisarius. But despite Narses's efforts, the damage had been done. By 562, when all enemy strongholds in Italy had been overcome, the Italian peninsula lay in ruins. Everything that had been left of the old Western Roman Empire had been destroyed. Entire cities were laid to waste. The Campania, a plague-infested wasteland. The Roman aqueducts, all but destroyed. The Roman institutions, gone. The Senate and the old Roman state offices, almost vanished. Justinian, by so horrendously mismanaging Belisarius, one of the greatest generals of all time, was directly responsible for the destruction of Italy and everything that was left of the glory of Rome in the West. Belisarius was a one-man superweapon, and the supposedly great Justinian did not support Belisarius as he would have needed for a swift and clean victory. Thus Justinian, who was said to have restored the glory of Rome, actually was the one who destroyed its glory. As a direct consequence, after the Gothic Wars, the Dark Ages would begin in Italy. Also, Justinian had overstretched the forces of the empire by fighting wars on every front, on all sides, at the same time. Sure, the climatic event of 536 and the plague of 541 and following years also were to blame a lot. But had the war efforts been handled better, the newly conquered territories could have been held, and Italy maybe even rebuilt. But as it was, these newly conquered territories would not last long. Large parts of Italy were already lost to the Lombards after 568. The Slavs invaded the Balkans just a few decades later, and some additional decades later, Egypt and the Levant were lost. Now sure, we cannot entirely blame Justinian for that, as the Roman-Sasanian War was mostly to blame for that disaster, and I admit I am using unfair hindsight. But for me, the biggest mistake of Justinian, besides his anti-pagan policies and brutal suppression of riots, was that he overstretched the forces of the empire, and his incredible mismanagement of Belisarius, the one-man superweapon, which directly led to the destruction of Italy. For me, therefore, Justinian, while in some regards really having been great, in others he did fail in achieving his ultimate promise of restoring the Roman Empire. And in fact, his actions would later lead to an even faster unraveling of the Imperium Romanum. And Patrizio, one of our new Sol Invictus supporters, has a question. As a high-ranking supporter of this channel, you can ask questions that I will try to answer as best as possible in the videos. His question is related to education in the Roman Empire. How was education like throughout Roman history? How was knowledge stored, created, or copied? How were thinkers picked among Romans? Where would thinkers think? Well, Patrizio, one would think that an empire as organized, vast, and highly developed as the Roman Empire had excellent institutions of education. But in fact, neither the Roman Republic nor the Roman Empire at any stage had a state-sponsored form of elementary education. Rome did not legally require its people to be educated. But despite that, children of wealthier families received their early education from private tutors. If one was poorer, one had to send their children to a ludus literarius. There were no dedicated school buildings, but the ludus literarius could be set up anywhere, in a shop, a private residence, or even in the street. Also, it should be noted that the ludus system only applied to boys, as girls were taught from an early age on how to become future housewives. At the age between 9 and 12, boys would then be taught by a grammaticus with, as the name implies, a strong focus on language skills. The final stage then was the study of rhetoric. But the great institutions of learning were throughout the history of the Roman Empire in the East. Alexandria was always a hotbed for thinkers of all kinds, from philosophers to mathematicians to engineers. The Museion in Alexandria would attract the greatest thinkers for hundreds of years. The Academy of Athens was also an institution that had existed since the days of Plato. Philosophy was distinctly Greek, and as such all the institutions were to be found in the Eastern Empire: Athens, Alexandria, Antioch, Caesarea. The Romans focused more on law and rhetoric. But here also, contrary to the Greeks who had founded institutions such as the Academy or the Museion as centers for learning, the Romans preferred private tutors. So we can say that the great centers for thinkers were to be found in Athens or Alexandria, the great cities of the Eastern Empire, with their old Greek institutions. And the knowledge was mostly stored on papyrus or parchment scrolls, which of course had to be manually copied and could be stored for long periods of time. Although the papyrus was more suitable for dry climates, thus parchment scrolls made from animal skins were more popular in the colder and wetter climates of the northern parts of the Roman Empire. And if you are interested to learn more about the Gothic Wars and how Belisarius managed to accomplish these astounding feats, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in what the Gothic Wars did to the city of Rome, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene valete.